A dash of mystery, a sparkle of magic, and all things cozy. Join your host, Elle Hartford, for Cozy Alchemy, a proud member of the Authors on the Air network. Hello and welcome to Cozy Alchemy, the podcast all about cozy, familiar books. I'm Elle, and my guest today is Keshe Chow, author of Strange Familiars, which we will get to in just a minute. But first, Keshe's going to start us off with a game of two truths and a lie.
Thanks so much for having me today, Elle.
Absolutely.
My three statements are, number one, I was once in a performance, a play with Hugh Jackman. Number two, I'm a classically trained opera singer. And number three, I wrote Strange Familiars in 27 days.
Ooh, these are good ones. We've had, believe it or not, we've had a couple people come on and one of their truth or lies has been that they're a classically trained singer of some kind. So I'm very intrigued by this trend. We'll see. I am going to guess that the third one is the lie, that it wasn't 27 days.
Okay. Well, actually, the lie is that I am not a classically trained opera singer. I'm a terrible singer. I'm not very good at singing. I try, but I'm not a very good singer. But I was once in a performance with Hugh Jackman when I was a kid, and I guess that's like more believable because we're both Australian. So that was before he took off in Hollywood. And I did actually write the book in 27 days. It just sort of poured out of me. It was the most fun book I've ever written, and I think I pulled a lot from my own experiences, as we can discuss later. But yeah, it was just a lot of fun to write. So yeah, that was first draft. Obviously, it took more to get it to like a a decent draft stage. But
Fair, yeah.
7 days.
I have to say, so I can relate because I also love to sing, but I don't think I'm particularly good at it. So I'm with you on that one. And I have to ask, I know, of course, we will get to the book and your experience and everything later, but I just am curious now. Did you have an outline or a plan before you started writing, or was that like pure discovery writing in that?
It was pure discovery writing. I love
fun.
I'm able to completely pants, which doesn't happen so often now because of like the way publishing works. Often if you're selling things on proposal, then you have to sort of like write an outline beforehand, which I don't favor because I feel like it takes some of the magic out of writing. Whereas this one was a project that I actually just wrote for myself. Like I didn't actually think it would go anywhere. And so I just wrote it. And that was why I had so much fun, I think, because I didn't really have any expectations. I was just like, this is just like my fun little side project that I was doing between deadlines. And yeah, I think that's why it came out so quickly, because I was like, this is my element. This is how I love to work.
Nice. Ah, that's so lovely. Okay, and on that note, we should tell listeners about it. So the book again is Strange Familiars. It's coming out in May. Can you tell us a little bit about it to get us started?
Yeah, so Strange Familiars is an academic rivals to lovers new adult fantasy that's set in a magical veterinary school where they treat witches, familiars, and mythical creatures. And in this book, my main characters, Gwendolyn and Harrisford, both want to come top of their year, but first they have to reluctantly team up to figure out the source of some deadly surges that are starting to affect the animals and some humans across London.
This is so much fun. I love the magical animals angle. And then, of course, there's so much else in the book to talk about, too. But right off the bat, we do have to ask, do you have a background in the veterinary world? Is that what inspired you?
Yes, actually, I am a veterinarian myself. I'm actually a cat specialist. So I spent like quite a long time before I became an author working in the veterinary industry, both as a small animal vet and then specializing in cats only. And so I pulled a lot from my own experiences. Obviously, like I never got to treat some of the more fun animals like and things like that. But yeah, like a lot of the sort of like the things that came out of the school scenes and a lot of the sort of experiences that you would have with clients and things like that. That was all drawn from real life. Yeah, and I think like some of my colleagues who have read it have said that it rings really true. Like they're like, even though this is like unicorns and stuff like that, like this is stuff that we identify with and that we can relate to because it feels like it comes from real life situations. So yeah.
That's so neat. I've seen that pop up in reviews online too, actually,
Yeah.
the early reviews. So
Yeah.
yeah, it sounds like it's definitely striking a chord with the folks who know.
Yeah. And I think those things, I think it's like when doctors watch things like like ER or whatever, or like people watch things that are in their area of expertise, or like the other thing is like when horse people read or watch
Ah,
media that has horses in it. Like I think you often sort of like cringe a little bit when there's like inaccuracies, and so I think that's the thing that like I think a lot of vets, we've often grown up or like seen a lot of media where vets are really like not very accurately portrayed. It's like they're portrayed as like James Herriot, like it's all like sort of like very happy and like like puppies and
yeah.
kittens going out on farms, and it's all very cozy. And it's like, and I think that often vets are kind of like a bit it's cynical, I guess, about like our portrayal in the media. So I think a lot of them are kind of like, oh my goodness, this is such a relief that we're finally getting someone who actually like knows what it's like being a vet who's writing something. And obviously like it's still fun and it's a bit amplified, like I've exaggerated certain things. Like we didn't really have so much of the rivalry between small animal vets and large animal vets in vet school. It was a little bit, but like I amped it up a little bit to have that romantic tension. But yeah, but a lot of it was very authentically, sourced. So
Nice. That's one of the fun things I find about fantasy is that you can just, like you have a basis in the real world or how things work, but then you can kind of play with things a little bit.
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yes. All right. Now, necessary follow-up question. Do you have a familiar of your own? I saw you had a friend there for a minute on the
Yeah,
video.
she's
Yeah.
a good spot to be, which is on my lap at my desk, and
Aww.
my ragdoll cat.
Yeah.
And she
She's adorable.
yeah, she's very cute. She likes to sit here, which makes it extremely like not ergonomic for me to type, but she doesn't really care about that. And I've tried to like put bed around and like boxes and things like that, but this is where she likes to be. So yeah, so she's living her best life today because I'm like I don't actually have to write, so you can see
Classic.
right now. She's around.
That's awesome. Did you end up drawing on other animals that you had met too?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like I've, when I was in vet school, like I had to work with animals that I was not super familiar with, so particularly horses. And so Gwen
Mm.
mentions in the book that she is not like a huge kind of dragon person. She's not really like a, large animal person at all. That was really drawn from my own experiences because when you go through vet school, you are kind of you are, you like you have to work with all animals. Like I had to learn how to deal with all sorts of animals, even though really what I was most familiar with were dogs and cats. And so, yeah,
Mm.
I think there was one line where Gwendolyn mentioned she stuffed up something in like a dragon exam, but the examiner felt so sorry for her that they just like let her like have it. Like, they just like passed her because it was never going to like work with dragons anyway. So they're like, well, we'll just like let you pass. And that actually did happen to me specifically in a horse exam because we were examined once on the markings on horses' faces, like their colors.
Mm.
And I think I got one of the like there's all these different names for the little marks on their foreheads, and I got one of
Yeah.
them wrong. And they were like, "No, this is not exactly right. I think it was blaze or diamond or whatever it's called." And they're like, "You've got it wrong. Like, we know you're not going to be a horse person, so you're not be equine vet. So we'll let you." I can guarantee I'm never going to be a horse vet.
I appreciate that they still want you to have like the perspective, I guess, and like have some sort of grounding.
Yeah, I mean, it was very good. in all sorts of species. And I got to do some amazing things when I was in vet school that I would have never been able to do otherwise. Like I worked with marine
Mm.
animals. I worked in wildlife sanctuaries and, got to feed dingoes. And I did like stuff in like a lot of agriculture. So I worked with like cattle and goats and sheep and just like animals that I'd literally never touched before up to that point. And so yeah, it was like really interesting. And I thought that was probably like the most like fascinating part about being in vet school, that it is just such a unique it's just such a unique course. Like you just don't get that in many other, I guess,
Yeah.
university courses, because yeah, you're just like thrown into this almost melting pot. Like there's a whole bunch of young adults and some mature age students, all on this rural, semi-rural campus, and you're just there with like a lot of animals and a lot of like alcohol and a lot of like high pressure studying mistakes, and it does end up being quite a very surreal experience. So yeah, so it was drawn.
Yeah, yeah. I have to say though, as you're describing it, it's like, yeah, that absolutely, of course, it's perfect for having like the academic, fantasy with like the, yeah, there's so much possibility there.
It's very much like
Yeah.
an insular course. Like you sort of end up with these people
Right.
are there, and you're just having these wild experiences that no one else can understand for like so many years, and you're like protected from the outside environment because you're so far away from everyone and going through these things that like are just so wild. Yeah, so I really had a lot of fun kind of bringing that, and yeah, so I was like telling some of the stories as well on social media about like some of my time in vet school, and that's been fun. Like I think I'd talked about recently when I was like dragged by this like donkey. I had this like story that I told on my social media account.
Oh no.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many things like that that I could talk about. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. That's so cool. And it's kind of a good segue too, because as you mentioned in your kind of like introduction of the book, like obviously we have like this fun setting, but there is a lot of other stuff going on, and you weave in kind of like wider world issues as well as like some action in this investigation that's going on. So how did you approach that? How did you approach balancing all these different things as well as like the fantasy and the romance and this investigation?
So yeah, as I said to you earlier, I didn't really plan the book out. Like it wasn't outlined. It just
Mm.
sort of like was something I wrote quite organically. So a lot of the stuff kind of came about just organically, basically. And I guess like this was really the story I wanted to tell. And I think when I was querying the book, there were a few agents who were like, we really wanted this to be like a proper, just like cozy book. Like, we wanted this just to be like nice little book where everyone's just like treating magical cats and dragons and like not have all the anti-capitalist commentary and all that sort of stuff. But really, like when I first came up with the idea, like I started thinking about I guess in this world, which I wanted to set in our world because it was more grounded, and it made sense to me to sort of like have something that was relatable because it was so related to my own experiences. I sort of thought, well, if magic was available in this day and age, or even like, 10 years ago or whatever, like what would things look like? And I thought, well, there was
Mm.
no world, like no way I can imagine a world where magic would be available and it would not have been commodified. Like there's just no way in our
Yeah.
like society it would definitely have been commodified somehow. And so that would then have impacts on on like humans, but also on animal welfare. And I think I've worked in, obviously, like I said, I'm a cat specialist, but I've also worked in the animal welfare space quite a lot. And so I see a lot of the ways that policy and governance and economics like impact on animals because they are a voiceless like group or
Yeah.
species of creatures that are sort of at the whims of human, like sometimes greed and corporate greed. And so I sort of like
Mm.
had to tell that story, as well as kind of do justice to my colleagues and the pressures that they face in the industry, because I think there is a bit of a perception that being a vet is like really just cuddling puppies and kittens. Like it's very like there is that aspect, but it is also a brutal industry. And the opening scene where Gwen is like grappling with this moral quandary of, what she does with this cat because the owner doesn't want to pay for the cat's treatment. That is a very real scenario that like vets we face on a very regular basis. So I think like for some people when they read it, they're sort of like, well, this isn't giving me, the heartwarming like veterinary puppies like vibe that I was after. But this was really the story that like came out of me because it was the story that I felt like I needed to tell. Yeah. So it kind of like just came about
Yeah.
naturally, really.
Nice. Yeah, which is very cool, first of all. But yeah, to your point, I think it's an interesting thing that's kind of going on like in the cozy fantasy space, that I see other authors talking about a lot, especially when you get to books that are like, it's the cozy fantasy setting up a cafe or setting up this business or, like whatever, and which is kind of inherently capitalist, right? But like a lot of the inspiration for and like kind of ideals of cozy fantasy is like anti-capitalist. And so there is kind of, especially at a politically charged time right now, there is kind of a lot to say there.
There is, and it is hard. Like, I mean, I think that there is so like all sorts of genres and all sorts of reading are very valid, but really, this is the story that I needed to
Mm.
tell, and so I think like if I came out as a vet and I portrayed the veterinary industry in a way that was not like did not do justice to being a vet in today's climate, I think that that would have been something that wouldn't have felt authentic or true to my story. So yeah, so I think that that's
Fair.
true, and I think that yeah, cozy fantasy like it can do both. Like I think that like there's this like scope to have commentary on the wider world as well, because I think that reading is so political and we are all in this world, and you can still have that feel good feeling, and I think that the book still has feel good parts. Like I think there's still
Yeah.
like
Oh yeah. Yeah.
heartwarming, and there's this
Yeah.
romance that's very sweet in a lot of parts, and the familiars that are very fun, and their relationship between Gwen and her own familiar that grows over the book. I think that that's all stuff that can give you that sort of that cozy vibe and that sort of heartwarming feeling. But yeah, I felt like I couldn't really ignore, because I think like a lot of times with fantasy, like it can feel a little bit like if magic is just freely available and there's no stakes to using it, it can feel a little bit like it's just too easy, sometimes. And maybe that's sometimes like a good thing to do, to like have that as not being a plot driver. But for me, it was like a big thing, because especially with the disparity between Gwen and Harrisford and their relative like life stories, like I think that having that as like a driving factor between why there was so much conflict between them was really important to me to portray.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and on that note, so we can shift to the very, like character focused. So Gwen, her struggles in particular are very poignant. Do you want to talk about like your inspiration for her and her romance as well?
I'm gonna just really sound like this is just a complete self-insert because really a lot of her struggles came from my struggles, because
Hmm.
I was an immigrant myself. So I moved to Australia when I was two. My family
Hmm.
was from Malaysia and I was born there. And so we moved here. We had like a couple of suitcases, like that was all, lived in like sort of a flat. I think the first few weeks had no furniture, slept on the floor. Like my mum had like one pot to cook in. And then my parents like built a little small business, but they worked so hard, like they worked so hard. And so I was always there, like weekends, like school holidays, school vacations. I was always like there, just like entertaining myself, because that's just, they were there all the time, like working. And then they still managed to, like, I got a scholarship to high school. I like ended up going through high school in a very affluent private area, like private school in a very affluent area. And I was always that kind of like underprivileged kid, like on the scholarship that was kind of like having
Yeah.
to work harder and try harder and like do everything, and then got into vet school, and it was sort of similar. And so all of those challenges sort of like felt very personal. And I think that's partly why the book came out so quickly and it was so easy for me to write. Much of it just was, it felt so personal. It just came from so many of my own experiences. Like I didn't have to, like I'd had to dig deep, but I didn't have to go outside of the scope so much of my own experiences, to an extent. Like obviously Harrisford's point of view is completely outside, like that is like a world that I'm not familiar with at all. And obviously
Yeah.
like the whole fantasy aspects and everything and all the corporate intrigue and everything like that was sort of stuff I had to move outside of my comfort zone. But Gwen, particularly as a character, is probably like the closest to me of any of the characters that I've written. So yeah, very, very personal.
Yeah. Well, and so because you have mentioned, so you've written other books, right? And I just because uh, kind of the author stereotype, right? We've been talking about like vet stereotypes, but the author stereotype is that your first book is the one that's like autobiographical and you shove it under the bed and then you write something else, right? So I'm so curious, like, why now? Like, why this one? What?
I actually don't know. I think, well, partly it's because like I never really wanted to write about vets. So when I first started writing, I was still working
Mm.
as a vet. Like I part owned a business, and I was working like so hard. I had like two little kids and I was like trying to run this business. And so that was like my reality. That
Mm.
was like my day to day. I was like working during the day as a vet. And then I was coming home and trying to write at night after I got the kids to sleep. And I was like, my little toddler was like co-sleeping with me, so he would like be
Oh.
lying on me, and I'd be propping my laptop. So it was just like my whole life was like caught up like that. So for me, writing was
Mm.
like complete escapism. So I wrote about things that were like completely different. And people always like, "Oh, are you writing about vet stuff?" And I was just like, "Hell no!" Like I got to get away from that as much as possible. And so I think, like,
Yeah.
for me, when I started out writing, like, there was just no way I was going to write about vet stuff. And I was like, it's so boring. You know, who wants to read about that? But then the more distance I got from it, and I ended up sort of like selling out of that business and I went into animal welfare and I was sort of doing like non-clinical work for a little bit. And so I ended up sort of like getting a little bit more distance from that clinical side of things and then almost sort of like feeling like, well, yeah, now I can actually process like because it is like it's hard work, you
Gotcha.
know, when you're in
Yeah.
that work, like you work so hard, like the days are so long, you're going completely so hard like all day, you know, just
Mm.
working with clients and doing procedures and like juggling things and multitasking all day, and then you're just wiped out by the end of it. So yeah, so I think like
Yeah.
it was only when I had sort of like time and distance that I was able to be like, well, yeah, actually, like I do want to write about that. And yeah, and I thought like coming up with a cool idea as well, like sort of like made it better. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. That no, that makes complete sense. Yeah. I can totally see that. Um okay. So, there's one more book in this series that's
Yeah.
planned, right?
Yes.
And did you know that from sitting down, or did you get to a point in your 27 days where you're like, "Oh man, this is bigger than what I could do in one book."
Well, I didn't actually have it planned as a duology when I was writing it because I was just writing it with no sort of thought about publication in mind and also just writing it with no plan. But I did get to the
Yeah.
and the first ending was kind of different, actually. Like I edited
Mm.
it when I signed with my current agent. So I queried this novel and signed with my current agent, and then we edited it to be a little bit different. And so the first iteration, it still had a cliffhanger at the end, and so I think I got to the end and I was like, this story is too big to fit into one book. And
Yeah.
I've always written standalones before, but always like with that sort of standalone with serious potential. And I've always wanted to write a sequel
Mm.
because I've always felt like I had more to say. But it's always been like, because the way publishing works is often they don't really like want to take a chance on you unless like you've got the
Yeah.
sales stuff. So with my last two books, it was always like, well, you can have a sequel if there's demand for it, you know, if your sales are enough to like warrant it. And they never were. So they sort of like said, well, there's no sequel. So I had to kind of like wind things up when I had to wind them up, which never felt like I had enough space to tell the story. So yeah, it was really nice to from the jump with this book, because when I signed the book deal for this book, it was immediately like made clear. My agent was like, "No, this is like a duology from the outset," and so it was really nice to go into this editing process with my current editor and publisher, knowing that I had the space to sort of like tell the
Yeah.
story up in the second book. Yeah, so.
Yeah, nice. And yeah, and so at this point, obviously no spoilers or anything, but like have you written the second book? Like, do you feel like you did say everything you wanted to say?
Yeah, I have written a second book. It's with my editor at the moment, and so we're just about to sort of embark on the structural developmental edits pretty soon,
Mm.
actually. And so, yeah, I think like I hope I've done it justice. I mean, it's always hard to know. And when I started writing the sequel, this was the first time I'd ever been allowed to write a sequel. Like I've been asking to write a
Mm.
sequel for years, like I've been sort of like being like,
Yeah.
let me in, let me write a sequel. And then this is the time I had the green light, the first time I had the green light to do it. And so when I started writing it, I was like, this is so hard. Like I was like questioning. So I was like, why did I beg to do it? It's so long to write it because I just never done it before. And so it was like pulling blood from a stone. It was like, trying to dig out my own heart. Like, it was such a contrast because the had been so easy to write. The
Yeah.
first one just flowed. And so I kind of like went into the second one expecting it to be similar. I was like, this is going to be fun. I get to write a sequel. And then I was like, oh my goodness, I really underestimated how difficult it was to do and wrap all of those threads up. And so, yeah. And again, I also like it was different because I had to outline it. Like, I had to get the outline approved from my editor. And so it was a very different experience. I had this like framework I had to work with. And sometimes when you're outlining, it's a bit harder because when you're pantsing or like discovery writing, you can just find out what happens as you go. But when you have an outline, you're like, well, I'm kind of committed to things getting to this point, but I didn't actually outline how they get to that point. And now I have to figure it out. And like, it's supposed to be that my characters are like quite smart and they figure it out, but I'm like, I'm not as smart as them. So I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, it was a process because I was sort of dealing with things in like these scientific things that I myself am not very familiar with. So yeah, I was kind of
I love that. I feel like that is super relatable, first of all, but also like, and like just how humbling it can be, especially when you have very smart characters. So you're like, oh
yes,
man,
that's right.
yeah. Well, okay, so obviously that's in the works. Is there anything else that's on the horizon? What's next?
So I'm currently writing a young adult fantasy, and that one's not really like I'm not really allowed to talk about it that much. But yeah,
Fair.
it's fun. That's sort of more similar to my first two books in that it's sort of inspired by Chinese and a bit of Western mythology as well. So hopefully I get to
Cool.
announce that soon. And yeah, but that's been a bit of fun as well. And yeah, I mean, I have like so many ideas. I have lots of ideas. I'm, one of those people that like will never ever run out of ideas to write. So yeah, hopefully there'll be more
Yeah.
on the horizon as well. Some of them are sort of in the same space as Strange Familiars. Others are wildly different. And so we'll see. We'll see what like I'm allowed to what I'm allowed to put out there.
Fair. I am the same way, and I get people will ask like, "Where do you get your ideas from?" And I'm like getting the ideas isn't the hard part. I don't
No,
know how to explain it. It's having the time and just
yeah,
like the physical capability of writing them all. Like that's
so
the hard
that's
part.
so true, isn't
Yeah.
it? The idea is like the fun bit.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, all right. Well, on that note, what advice would you give to yourself if you could go back and talk to yourself when you were just starting out? What would you say?
I always say the same thing, so I feel like it's really boring to anyone who has listened to more than one of my or read more than one of my interviews, and that is really to find your support network, because I think
Mm.
that there are so many ups and downs in publishing, whether you go the traditional publishing path or the indie path. I haven't been down the indie path, but I have friends who have, and I know that there are times when things are really, really good, and there are a lot of times where things are really awful. And so you need that support network. Like, it's such a solitary activity, writing, but the actual sort of experience of publishing, can be so lonely unless you have that group of people who are ready to cheer you on when things are going well, but also ready to catch you when you fall and you're like depressed because things are not going well. And that is invaluable. So I think that would be my biggest piece of advice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one for sure. Um, and speaking of finding people, um, obviously we will get to our final question in just a minute, but before we do, I will have like your links, like your website and your bio in the show notes. But is there any way in particular you want people to find you? Like you're saying on social media, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I'm active on social media. I'm Keshe Writes on, which is KESHEWRITES. I thought I'd better spell that because it's not actually Keshe, even though I say my name. Now it's Quiche like the food. So that is Instagram and Threads and TikTok. And then my website is www.keshechow.com. And so, yeah, I sort of like update that when I remember. And I've got a newsletter. I do
Fair.
have a newsletter which I do send out when I have something. I'm not like a regular newsletter sender. I just
Mm,
sort of usually send it out when I have something to say. Yeah. So those
fair.
are the
Fair.
main things. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Okay. Ending on a high note. What is one win that you've had in the past week? It could be anything.
So I think if we're talking about writing wins particularly, I think that it's just when like you get DMs from readers just saying that they've loved book.
Ah,
Love that. Like, it is
yeah.
just the best feeling. Especially when it's someone who says that they related to something, whether they related to like the main character's struggles or things like that, or they've been through like academia themselves and they relate to some of the struggles you have as like a woman or something like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's probably the main thing, that I've had a few of those DMs and they've been really nice.
Absolutely. 100%. All right. Well, Keish, thank you so much for having been here. Listeners, obviously, check everything out in the show notes and go find Keish online on social media and check out Strange Familiars. And in the meantime, I will talk to you next time.